Channel. Today we're going to be talking about what would stop your business from operating tomorrow. So this is operational resilience. Operational resilience is about ensuring that your business is able to withstand disruption. So whether that's a cyber event or an unexpected outage or whatever it is, the concept of your business being resilient enough, having enough planning in place to continue to bounce back. And I make this point every so often, but with cybersecurity, we're not saying that we're never going to be attacked. We're going to prevent attacks 100%. We're saying that when attacks do happen, we are resilient enough to bounce back and to continue. So preventing like revenue disruption or disruption to customers. We want service continuity. So the uncomfortable truth. Most businesses do not fail from one big event. It's never one thing that takes everyone out. So let's say I'll give an example of a cyber event. Let's say an attacker attacks your website and then you have to build it from scratch. The problem isn't that the website has been attacked because you haven't lost the ability to build a website again. But in that instance, you've lost the ability to continue from where you were. So let's give two examples. On one side is the person that has a website that they've built. It's a really good website, but they don't have any backup. So they don't have anything saved, whether it's their processes, whether it's the content on the website. They don't have like an instruction manual or a set of instructions that they can hand to someone and say, rebuild this in, let's say, 24 hours or a month or a week. They don't have any of that. So despite it being good whilst everything is fine, they don't have the ability, they don't have the resilience or the systems in place to continue after an emergency or after disruption. Compare that to business B, who has the website is okay, the website works well, but they also have an extensive system that or like a workbook that has how to build the website. The content is backed up somewhere else. They can switch to another provider. They have things in place to bring the website back up altogether. So when you compare both businesses in terms of getting back online, and let's say you're an e-commerce brand and you want to start selling again, business B is perfectly placed to do that within, let's say, 6 to 12 hours, compared to business A that does not have any backup. They have to start from scratch. So it's almost like starting your business all over again. So it's not one thing. It's the fact it's usually lack of preparation and unfortunate circumstances. So they fell because critical dependencies were invisible. Sometimes we simplify things and say, to do A, we only need A, B, and C. But really, sometimes they're hidden things that you're not realizing are propping things up. So, another example of that would be, let's say, as a business, you rely heavily on Microsoft. So Microsoft does your emails, your communications, your word processing, your presentations, everything is done with Microsoft. You might believe that as a business, the most critical thing you have is, let's say, website or something like that. But then loss of that critical part of the business makes you realize actually are most things that you do as a business are reliant on having Microsoft in place, as an example, or whichever vendor it is. And then small outage can expose weak ownership. Ownership is a very important topic. Ownership is about making sure that not only do we know what needs to be done, we have a specific person assigned. It's like, the classic example of the bystander effect. If there's an emergency and someone says, someone call an ambulance, unless you point to a person and say, you call the ambulance, chances are no one is going to call the ambulance, as an example. If there's not a specific person that has been assigned the responsibility and has practiced that duty, so doing like the equivalent of like a fire drill, tabletop exercises, things to double check that what you believe will happen in an emergency is actually the case. So let's say, for example, in an emergency, in like, let's say like a school or something, in an emergency, we have a first aid kit. So an emergency happens, you run to the first aid kit, open it, everything inside is expired. So you might as well not have it. You need to practice whatever emergency things you have in place to make sure that they are working well and they are checked regularly. And that's where ownership comes in. Someone needs to own that responsibility. They need to have it as part of their job description that every 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, they check X, Y, or Z. Obviously, depending on the criticality. So if it's something that's super critical, I would, if you can, monthly, especially if it's quick to check it on a monthly basis. But if it's something less critical, you can adjust the frequency as appropriate. A supplier failure can stop delivery quickly. I'll use a tech example for this. So every now and again, one of the big cloud providers will have an outage. So you'll notice that some services are down. So whether it's like your music subscriptions or social media websites, and that's all because one supplier has had an issue. And then resilience starts with knowing what matters. If you don't know about it, you cannot plan for it. That's always at the bottom line. Why this matters for startups. So startups rely on a small number of tools and people. So for a lot of these examples, I've mentioned checking things on a regular basis. For larger organizations, they have the capacity to invest in a service to check this for them, for example. So for like a SOC, for example, you can outsource your security operations to a third party who that's all they do as a business. They're there watching your systems 24/7 for any outages, as an example. But if you're a small startup, you're bootstrapping, you're quite a lean business, you might not have the capacity to do that. And that's where having systems in place as a startup is even more important. Payments, websites, email, and suppliers can become single points in failure. So touching on my previous examples, we don't realize how reliant we are on these things. In the digital age, most of us transact and do business through any of those mediums. No one is an island, so it's important to understand how crucial things like that are. Recovery is often assumed, not tested. So rather than, you know, almost theoretically sketching out how you would recover, always practice it. Even if it means that, I don't know, on the least busy day, so let's say a Friday or something, depending on your business, sitting around as a table and going through the steps of how you would recover. Always, every single time I've done this, I've seen something that hasn't been anticipated before. And then based on that, you're able to do lessons learned and incorporate that into your long-term plan. So it's never a waste of exercise. There's always something new to learn. And I also find that adding as many stakeholders to this as possible at all levels, so whether they're senior, whether they're very junior, include everyone. Everyone's perspective is interesting. It's always, I feel like it's always the most, I don't know if flippant is the right word. It's always the most casual person that says something that turns out to be very, very important. Like they'll say it very casually, thinking that, you know, the people that are closer to it would have anticipated it, but most of the time it hasn't been. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the whole point of the exercise, having time to sit and reflect what is the reality versus what we think. And then more than anything, make sure you bake that into whatever you decide as the recovery plan. Founders may not know what would stop trading. So again, you might think that the worst thing that could happen is your website going down, but actually it might be something else. So just always, it might be like a code library, or it might be something more significant with your payment provider. So just have a view of everything, and then by the time you start practicing and doing exercises, you'll actually have an accurate view of this. And then operational resilience protects revenue, trust, and delivery. People want things now, or in fact yesterday. So rather than believing that, rather than leaving things to chance, or like the risk of, you know, reputational damage, take some time on a regular basis to practice your recovery exercises and understand what's important as a business. So the business continuity risk map. Operational resilience is often interchanged with business continuity, so the ability for the business to continue. So systems, people, data, vendors, recovery. So systems, so the things that you use to get the job done. So whether that's website, applications, SaaS tools, all the different little things. Like for example, if you're a sales company, you might think that, you know, your product is most important, but what if it's your CRM as an example? So just have a view of this. An exercise I like to do is to have a notepad. So as I'm doing my day, I'm sort of mapping out, okay, these are the things that are important. People, actually, I'm going to go back to systems. I don't normally count physical things as part of business continuity unless they're significant. So there's a thing called significant physical assets, or I call it significant physical assets. So not chairs and tables, but just anything that would take, to me, I think if it takes more than 24 hours to replace, then I think it's significant, because you can't just order a new one from Amazon or wherever it is. So consider things like that as well. So if there's a part of your, like something, a physical asset that's significant that you use in your day-to-day, also think of that. People, founders, admins, developers, contractors. Do you have a third party that you're heavily reliant on? Do you have a member of staff that has loads of critical processes? So let's say someone that processes payroll, that pays suppliers, those sort of roles, those are the sort of things you should be thinking of in terms of continuity. So if anything happens to them, personal leave, extended time off, how would you continue as a business? Data, Depending on the nature of your business, sometimes customer data is very, very important. As well as protecting it, it's also an enabling factor for business as well. Whether that's repeat selling to people you've already sold to existing customers, or if they're used in any other way as well. Vendors, who are you relying on? Sometimes, as you start to do this exercise, you realize that actually you have huge exposure to one particular vendor. So earlier I mentioned Microsoft. Like, let's say the majority of your business applications run on a particular supplier, but in the same way, it could be anyone. Could also be geographical risk as well. So are all your, I don't know, products coming from a certain place? If anything happens to said certain place, what impact is it going to have on you? Those are things to think of as well. And then recovery, backups, workarounds, ownership, escalation. So backups, having your data stored somewhere else as well as an alternative. So let's say like your sales team has standard presentations that they deliver, consistently, rather than having them backed up, only having the sole copy, making sure there are copies elsewhere that can be reinstated in case anything happens or if there's an outage. And then workaround. So talking about key person risk, if there's one person that does a lot of the processes, make sure they have a deputy or like a second person that is also trained in that process. So again, if someone has like long periods of leave or there's some sort of emergency, you're able to continue as a business. Failure one, critical systems are not documented. So this is about inventorying what you have. So think of your business, what's important to your business, where your revenue drivers, what processes are like protective. So whether it's like cybersecurity, whatever it is that is important for your business, whether it's compliance, revenue, whatever reason there is for it to be important, or whatever is important to you as a business, make sure those processes are mapped. So you can do it by function or do it by job role. It could be a group exercise and you can sit down and say, okay, in a day, what is our most important activity? And then just work through and just get into the mindset of making sure that you're documenting everything, even if it's a one-off activity. Like, for example, like a one-off health and safety or critical activity that you need to make sure that that you have a legal obligation to complete, or you know that you need to do it on whatever schedule there is. Even if it's one off, try to document it, because if you ever have to repeat it, you want to be able to account for it when it comes to operational resilience, being able to continue. So, going through this list, if the business depends on tools that nobody has formally listed. So this is typical in like developer environments. So where you have developers that are using free tools online that are, like I said, they're free. You're not paying for them per se, but it's a crucial part of the job in terms of productivity or functionality. List those as well. Just because something isn't paid for, it doesn't mean that it's not essential. If anything, it's highlighting that there's a form of criticality that you need to make sure that you've accounted for. So whether that means in the future you invest in something just to make sure that you always have access to it, or just knowing that it's something you rely on. Similar to that, SaaS tools become invisible infrastructure. So imagine something like a password manager that the team uses for seamlessly accessing other websites in a secure way. Again, something that's easy to forget but very important. Domains is a very important one. So domains, email payments, especially if you're like a customer facing business. If all of your customers usually contact you via email and you lose access to email, that's very, very important, similar to like website. And then no list means no clear protection priority. If you have limited resources, which some startups have, if you don't have a clear view of everything you have, you can't adequately assign like budget to each of them. And then lastly, you can't recover what you haven't identified. So if you've done this whole exercise and then something happens and then you then at that point realize that something is missing, sometimes it can be impossible to recover from and you have to start over. Failure 2, ownership is unclear. Don't leave anything to assumptions. For me, I like to have a simple spreadsheet. If you're strapped for cash, simple spreadsheet, process, ownership, backup, owner. So process, what is it? What do we use it for? Ownership, who owns it? So sometimes there's a difference between the person that owns it and the person that runs it. But in any case, the person that is responsible for it should be assigned and they should be well versed in it. And then a backup, so a deputy in case they're not there. Admin access is not the same as accountability. So that's touching upon sometimes there's a difference between the person that owns it and the person that runs it. Make sure that difference is documented. There should be adequate seniority and product knowledge in that case. And then recovery decisions become slow under pressure. Again, this is a symptom of not practicing your recovery. So have your plan for recovery, execute it, and have it as something that's iterative. It's not something that you create once and put somewhere. You need to make sure that you're maturing it along with, let's say, improvements in version. So if a new version's been repeated, that would trigger you starting the process over, making sure that recovery works with the new way of the tool being. And then every critical system needs an owner. Every owner needs a backup owner. Quite simple stuff. Just making sure that there's planning for uncertainty, really. Failure 3. Vendors are treated as as background support. So payment providers can block revenue. So let's imagine that your main payment provider has some sort of outage and they're not going to be able to fix it for a week. You cannot go a week without collecting payments. So having an alternative that you're able to look into, that's ready to go, and just needs like a quick switch over, as opposed to having no alternative that you've researched. I always try to avoid making decisions under pressure. So you don't want to wait for there to be an emergency to have something. You always want to have like a list of, if this happens, we'll go to this one. If this happens, we'll go to this one. So you've already thought it through. You've thought it through under pressure. It's the equivalent of leaving home, having 3 alternative routes that you're comfortable with, rather than sitting on the side of the motorway looking frantically for a new route, as an example. Fulfillment partners can stop delivery. So this, I will admit, this one is a bit tricky, but it's just for the purpose of example. So fulfillment partners can stop delivery. So if you have a fulfillment partner, using the e-commerce example again, it can be difficult to switch to a new one like immediately. But just having it in mind, or including clauses in your contracts to allow ease of switch over in case of like lack of performance or something. Again, just to make sure that you don't end up with reputational damage to your organization because of lack of delivery. So that could be the same for a data center. If you're not happy with performance, having a clause that allows you to switch over. Agencies may control key accounts. So this is applicable for things like social media or media buying accounts. If they have an issue like a vulnerability or anything like that, they can cause quite a big problem for yourselves as well. So rather than thinking of them as something quite minor, vendors can be showstoppers. SaaS vendors may hold customer data. So when you transfer data externally, you still have the same level of responsibility. So you need to make sure that whoever you're transferring to has the same level of security as you do. And then vendor risk is operational risk. So they pose a threat to your continuing business operations. So you need to treat them just as seriously as you treat your own operations. Backups, failure 4, backups are assumed and not checked. The amount of times that people have assumed that a backup is available, or that a backup can be quickly switched to or quickly restored, when it hasn't been tested, will always remain a mystery to me. It's not enough to say that you've got a backup. You need to check. You need to check that the backup is appropriate. So if it's something that is years old, it might not do the job for you. You need to make sure that the frequency of backups is appropriate for your type of business. You need to make sure that it's easy to recover and the time it takes to recover as well. So is it in long cold storage, or is it something that is easy to switch over? Also, another point is making sure that the type of recovery is appropriate for your business. So some businesses, it's better based on their requirements, it's better to have an active version all ready to go, as opposed, which is more expensive, but it's based on the needs of the business. It makes more sense compared to something that is in cold storage. They'll take a little bit of time to get up and running. Recovery steps may be undocumented. A simple flowchart will do it. Just putting out the steps, laying out the steps, showing exactly how to do it. And then as you practice the recovery, preferably in a group setting, you're able to give feedback and essentially discuss how to make it easier to implement if anything did happen. And then naturally practice the restoration, test how long it takes, because then that will determine if you need to maybe change or make some tweaks or change the frequency of backup. Access control is a massive one as well, making sure the appropriate people can access things. So that's where having a deputy helps a lot, or maybe even a break glass account, so that you're able to, so that there's always a way of accessing it in an emergency. And then, yeah, our old backups may not cover current processes. You need to make sure that they're maturing over time as your processes mature. And then lastly, recovery should be tested before disruption. Always, always. Don't wait for an emergency to try it for the first time. Failure 5, workarounds are not planned. So teams often improvise during disruption. It's in an ideal world, you'd have a playbook that you're following. So you've practiced it, you've perfected it, and you just follow it step by step. Manual workarounds may not be known. So using a payment example, let's say payroll fails, but you still need to pay your employees. It might not be known how to do that. So making sure that you know how to do the backup process. Customer communication may be delayed. This is less than ideal, but having set canned responses, so you've got templates of exactly what you're going to say in each scenario. So plan out as many scenarios as you can think. So whether it's like the website is down or orders are delayed, whatever it is as a result. So depending on the impact level, you'll have different sets of scenarios that you've planned for. And in those tabletop exercises, you can decide that every month as you do the exercise, you're going to create 3, and then over time you review them, refine them. Hopefully you never have to use them, but at least you have it so you don't have to debate around what you're going to say. An example of this that is always a difficult one is during a data breach, because you want to write something that legal are happy with, that let's say PR are happy with as well, but you also need to communicate quickly, so you don't want it to be tense whilst you're devising that communication. Critical decisions may depend on one person. So it's always similar to the previous points, actually. It's always nice to like plan or make or have conversations when you're not under pressure. If there's a critical decision that needs to be made and there's already a bit of like tension because of the disruption or panic, the last thing you want to do is to have to make a critical decision in that moment. You want to have something you've already planned beforehand, where possible. Sometimes you can't help it, but where possible. And then a simple workaround can protect continuity. For each of your critical processes, where possible, try to devise a workaround. If it's manual, fine. If it's just something to allow continuity in the interim, just before you can get things back up and running. Failure 6, incidents do not become improvements. A mistake is only a problem if you do not learn from it. So small disruptions are forgotten once fixed. So let's say you haven't practiced your recovery process, you've hit a snag as you're recovering, but then you don't go back and put it back into the process. That's where it becomes a problem. Repeated problems reveal weak controls. No incident log means no learning loop. So in short, your lessons learned, document them. I think documenting them is good, but then having a discussion as well, because you always discover more as you start to talk to people. Having a discussion, don't have it as a static document, have it as a working document that people can discuss, understand together, and then if applicable, add it to your add it to your security awareness training to make sure that across the business we're learning from everything that's happened on that occasion. And then resilience improved when issues are reviewed. So periodically, as you're doing your tabletop exercises, make sure that you're specifically addressing the scenarios that came up in reality, and making sure that you have a plan for that moving forward. So this is questions to founders. So what system would stop sales tomorrow? Which supplier would stop delivery tomorrow? Which person holds critical knowledge? Where is customer data most exposed? How quickly could you recover if this failed? So for all of these, they need to be tested, not theoretical. They need to be tested, not theoretical. So especially with the which person holds critical knowledge, because I think in all organizations, but especially in startups, sometimes people leave the business and a bunch of knowledge leaves with them. What can you do as a founder to make sure that the knowledge of the business is retained? So do you need to start a wiki? Do you need a wiki being a knowledge repository that just has all the Q&As that you get, the frequently asked questions that new people tend to ask, or just in-depth product knowledge? Those are the things that are going to save you when it comes to starting over or rebuilding or recovering. Your recovery should be well documented and well referenced as well. So fragile versus resilient startup operations. So in a fragile operation, a business that hasn't got much operational resilience, they will have no critical system list. So they have no idea what is important to them as a business, documented anywhere. No clear ownership. So things are assumed. I thought he would do it. I thought she would do it. I thought they would do it. no backup supplier. If the main supplier was to implode, so to speak, what would you do instead? How long would it take to get that in place? No recovery test. So you have your recovery plan neatly wrapped up, but you've never tested it, so you're not sure. No incident routine. So if there's an incident, you don't have a clear sequence of events. You're just going about it in a freestyle fashion. Compared to a resilient operation, so they know exactly where their critical systems are. They have ownership assigned, so there's accountability. Workarounds are documented, so whether that's a backup person or manual workarounds in case of outages. Recovery is tested on a regular basis, and incidents are reviewed for lessons learned on a regular basis. So the better resilience model is one, identify. So list the systems, the vendors, the data, the people that the business depends on. Make this as detailed as possible. Involve as many people as possible in this process to make sure you don't forget anything. Prioritize. So based on your budget, based on what you have identified as major like revenue disruptors or things like that, prioritize. So start with the systems that you can't live. I kind of go by duration. So the things that you can go a long time without, that could probably go at the bottom of the list. The things that you can't go more than an hour without, that should be at the top of the list. And then, assign resource as appropriate from there. Prepare. So document the owners, have your workarounds, your backups, and your escalation steps. And then lastly, test. So run simple recovery exercises. So run simulations, do role plays, just to understand how close to reality is this plan. And then based on that, you're going to almost go back to the beginning of the process and tweak the recovery plan until it is, I say perfect, but until it works well enough and you can recover in a satisfying manner. How to build a resilience baseline. So list your business critical systems, identify your owners and backup systems. So imagine a table, put this in table form, map vendors and operational dependencies, whether it's processes, functions, activities, document the recovery steps and the workarounds, and then test recovery before a real incident. The key to this is to test continuously. What good resilience creates is faster recovery from disruption, so shorter periods of time of revenue disruption. Let's say it's like a website, a shorter period of time where you're unable to service your customers. Clear ownership under pressure, so when the real thing happens, you're able to go straight in, you know exactly what to do. Everyone in the business knows exactly what to do. Better vendor and dependency visibility, so you should have a view of your vendor concentration. So how much or how many vendors are you externally relying on? Stronger client and investor confidence. Knowing that you can recover quickly is a good sign to investors, and you have higher confidence in your ability to maintain your reputation with customers and service your customers as well. And lastly, less panic. We don't need stress. So the real test, if the business could not operate tomorrow, would you know exactly what fell, who owns it, and how to recover? So operational resilience is not a document, it's almost like a practice or capability that you develop as a business. Resilience starts before disruption. If a system, supplier, person or process could stop the business tomorrow, it needs visibility, ownership, and a recovery plan today. So rather than wait for something bad to happen, know ahead of time where your problems are so you can start working on them slowly. So I have a handful of products that are designed for addressing these issues, starting with layer 1, the Startup Security Toolkit. So this is a DIY course that is self-paced. It's got videos explaining and supporting worksheets for documenting. Operational resilience. Operational resilience is one module out of 10, and it gives a system for creating visibility of your processes, your people, your assets, and building processes around that. Going back. This item is best for founders that haven't got much cybersecurity knowledge but wants to start building some capability towards that. So it's got a lot of explanations in there. There are a lot of definitions. So if you're not too close to cybersecurity, you're still going to be able to use this with ease. Next is layer 2. So this is the startup security implementation kit. So this is people that have a bit more cybersecurity knowledge and slight maturity in terms of implementation. This takes it to the next level. So it gives you, it builds upon the toolkit in terms of the topics covered, but then it gives a path to maturity as well. So if you're heading towards becoming certified, this is a product for you. But then also for people that don't necessarily want to have an in-house cybersecurity team at present, it's the opportunity to establish some of the cybersecurity beforehand. Let's say you're investment or you're just growing as an organization. And then 4, I've skipped 3 as it's not applicable to this. 4 is fractional security advisory. So I come into the business and I support with specific projects that you have. And it's a more tailored service compared to the other 2, because the other 2 are self-paced courses. And I also offer, I guess, office hours like consulting. So if you have any questions that haven't been covered in the presentation, you can send me an email or book a consultation. My information will be in the bio. Thanks for watching.